motivation is a word that is overused and oftentimes misused.
Financial success today, it's more about based on really having the long-term vision.
What's up, guys? Welcome to another episode of Momentum TV. We've been crazy busy traveling all over the place. We were in Seattle for about a week. We're going to be heading to, looks like Cleveland, I think. I don't know. We'll see, for a day or so. And then we'll be heading back to the West Coast for another full 10 days. So we're literally all over the place, back and forth. Today, what I want to share with you guys is a little bit about a book I've been reading called Drive by Daniel Pink. It's a pretty interesting conversation. I think it's really relevant for people who are in business. Well, to sum it up, I would have to say that motivation is a word that is overused and oftentimes misused. And so you hear people say, oh, I'm motivated, I'm pumped up, I'm fired up. And so what this author goes into are the different levels of motivation and how it really makes a difference in the quality of work that's actually being created based on the type of motivation someone is being driven by. So to keep it simple, he breaks it up as 3 tiers of motivation. So motivation 1.0 started 50,000 years ago with our ancestors when they were basically motivated for survival, right? Because at any moment they could turn around and a saber-toothed tiger could just take them out real quick, or whatever it is. So motivation 1.0 is really about survival, your physiological needs. Motivation 2.0 started in the Industrial Revolution, where he basically explains how there was the system of punishment and reward. Where people would get fired, people would get hired, people would get promoted based on their performance at work. So it was really result-oriented, result-driven. So people were extrinsically motivated because of the pain involved in doing something they're not supposed to, as well as the reward involved if they do. So what happens in that scenario are people are motivated not because of themselves, but because of the external factors around them. So now what he talks about is most people are either motivated 1.0 or motivated 2.0, but in the book he opens up the idea of a third dimension, motivation 3.0. So motivation 3.0 is a far better quality motivation, where it's not based on survival and need and scarcity limitation. It's not based on fear of punishment, but it's based on internal intrinsic values. So he says that people who are motivated on the third dimension, or 3.0, are coming from a totally different space and place. And as a result, their quality of work, their quality of efficiency, their quality of performance is at a whole nother level. And so what he talks about with motivation 3.0 is intrinsically motivated. He gave a couple of examples of some experiments that were done. So they did an experiment in India with this company based on agility. And I guess the way they did it was they incentivized the people who were able to perform well with the sport or game with money. And it was interesting because there was 2 groups, those that were incentivized by external things and those that weren't incentivized at all. And interesting enough, the people who were incentivized with money performed a lot worse because they couldn't handle the pressure. So I guess because there was that stick and carrot, as he calls it, right? That extrinsic motivator, the pain or pleasure reward system, these individuals felt pressure, and because they felt pressure, they couldn't perform, versus the other people who were just playing to play. There was no external value or reward. It was just because they wanted to play the game, so they ended up performing better. The other experiment was with kids. So there were 2 groups of kids. One group, of course, they incentivized not with money, but with a certificate. And what the kids had to do was draw. So group 1 had to draw. Once they were completed drawing, they would get a certificate. So they were promised a certificate. The other group weren't promised anything. So it was just draw for the sake of drawing. So what ended up happening, the kids who drew that were promised a certificate, once they completed the drawing, got their certificate. The kids who were not promised anything, they didn't get anything, but here is where the experiment turns around. The people who were running the experiment then had both groups of kids and asked them to draw again. But this time, there would be no certificate at all for the first group. Well, it turns out that the first group, who were initially incentivized, they did not want to draw again because they were now trained psychologically to draw for a reward. Whereas the other group, they still drew because they just drew for the sake of drawing. So I guess the purpose and moral of the story is what Daniel Pink is saying is that I guess there's a shift that's happening, a mindset that's occurring in corporate America and different businesses where it's not about the stick and carrot, it's not about the extrinsic motivators, pain and pleasure, reward and punishment, but really about getting into that third dimension of intrinsic motivation. And what he talks about, let's go into it really quick, intrinsic motivation, I think it's super important because what it really focuses in on are the core values that that individual has. So as an example, he says people who are creative, when they get into their flow in whatever it is they're doing, maybe it's an artist who's painting. So when they're painting, creating a masterpiece, they're not counting time. They're not thinking, oh, I got to put in my 8 hours today, put in 8 hours every week for 48 hours a week to get paid a paycheck, because it's not a routine for them. It's something that they're passionate about, something that they love, and something they have meaning in. It's an expression of themselves. So because of that, they're not just doing the work for a reward. They're not just doing the work for avoiding some type of punishment. They're doing it because they're passionate about it. And beyond passion is they're purposeful about their work, right? It's a representation of who they are. And so what he talks about is how do we get to that level? And is it possible to get to that level if you're not an artist, right? Athletes are the same way. Athletes get into their flow. A lot of times it starts off as a passion, as an intrinsic motivation. Eventually it does become a thing where they get paid to do it, and then obviously becomes an external motivator. But understand that when these individuals that are operating with a motivational third dimension, intrinsic motivation, they're not thinking about the time they're putting into the work. They're not thinking necessarily about the financial gain they're putting into the work. They're doing it because they're just obsessed about the process. They're obsessed about what they're doing. So what he says is these individuals focus in on perfection. Their obsession is about perfection. So just like any other artist wants to create the final or greatest masterpiece, or a songwriter wants to write the greatest song, or a tech company like Apple or Microsoft or whatever wants to create the very best technology, people who are operating that third dimension are playing a different game. And because they play a different game, they're a lot happier. They're a lot more fulfilled. And so the story goes, or the book is really just about understanding the key differences. Now, what's my opinion on the whole deal? And I think it's pretty interesting because we actually have people who reach out to us because they need help, whether it's to help their organization start raising the results they're producing, or on an individual level where they're trying to just get to the next level in their business. And so I'm a firm believer in accountability and having a level of structure in place that becomes the benchmark. Now, having an accountability system and a benchmark isn't necessarily a tier 2 motivation like Daniel Pink talks about, where it's punishment and reward. What I think it is creating standards in an organization. So there has to be a standard protocol or a standard level of performance that needs to be understood. And at the same time, giving people the freedom and ability to have their own motivations as to why they're going to perform. So it can't just be monetary. It can't just be to get a bonus. It can't just be for, having points on a scoreboard. Those things are nothing but a feedback mechanism. If people are only driven by the money or only driven by the external values, well, they're not going to perform with the fullness of who they are. They're not going to put their soul and full amount of creativity into the work. Why? Because they're doing it just for external reasons. The motivation has to come from within. It has to go from motivation to inspiration. So I think the idea of Motivation 2.0 is designed to set a standard. So there's a minimum standard as far as culture and performance are concerned. But the reality is people need to figure that out. They have to connect their own dots for what's going to be the thing that's going to be meaningful to them. That's going to really provide that excitement and passion that really fulfills them and gives them joy in the work that they're doing. And so if you're a business owner right now, and I know that as a business owner myself, it's important to think about the bottom line. It's important to think about the end game, which is obviously we need to be profitable. Otherwise, we're going to be out of business. But beyond that, we have to start thinking beyond the money. We have to start thinking beyond the superficial level of what happens when we do what we do and start playing a bigger game. I remember a quote that says, if you pursue something bigger than money, you automatically become bigger than money. So to sum up this motivation 1.0, 2.0, 3.0, where are you in the category? Are you a survival-based individual where you're just thinking about surviving week to week, month to month? How are we going to pay the bills? How are we going to keep the shelter over our head? Are you motivated 2.0 or second dimension where it's about, well, if I don't perform, what are people going to think about me? My boss going to fire me? Am I going to be socially accepted, right? It's more of a social aspect of motivation. You're doing it because you want to fit in and be accepted and be rewarded or avoid punishment. Or are you motivation 3.0, meaning you operate in the third dimension, which basically states that you don't need anything or anyone to motivate you because you're beyond the motivation. You come from a place of self-expression. You come from a place of living your purpose. You are in line with connecting your creativity with your purpose in life, and your work is a reflection of it. Your work, whatever it is you do, whether you're a nurse, a teacher, a doctor, an entrepreneur, your work becomes the medium or the stage or platform in which you get to express and display that creativity. And so the idea is, how do you get to that level? I believe there's a balance of both. You need to have the macro perspective, big picture, inspirational, creativity, purpose-driven why for why you do what you do, but you also have the awareness. You also have to have the awareness of the micro, day-to-day structural accountability systems and benchmarks in play so you don't lose sight of the realities of what keeps a business moving forward. Take a look at that book, check it out. Drive, pretty simple read. I think the idea behind the conversation is a lot of us here right now are always looking for ways to become better, to do more, and be able to take our lives to the next level. So looking at what's driving you and knowing the root of your motivation, I think is very, very important, because once you understand what truly makes you tick, once you understand what is driving you, understand that now you actually have your hand on that button, right? Or that on and off switch, so you can begin turning it on, turning it down, or even like a volume switch in a car, a radio, so you can turn the volume up or turn the volume down. Once you get to that place of knowing yourself and having that self-awareness about what moves you, drives you, and what gets you inspired, I think that is the secret sauce, right? It's not about being around motivated people. Yes, that helps. It's not necessarily about reading all these different books. Yeah, it helps. I think what's more important than all the things you can do physically is to really get clear on who you are mentally, emotionally, and spiritually, and get to the core of what really drives you. We're all driven by different things, in different stages of our life. In the beginning, when we're teenagers, we're driven by acceptance and being cool and, all that. When you get into college, you're driven by performance, getting good grades to be able to get a good job. Once you hit your 20s and 30s, you're driven by finances and to be able to make a living and provide a lifestyle for your family. And then once you get to 40 and above, you're thinking about purpose and mission and what are you actually doing to leave your mark on this earth, right? So get clear on where you are, and there's no reason why you can't segment your motivation. I think there is a time and a place to have survival-based motivation. There's a time and a place to have external motivation, and a time and a place to have intrinsic motivation. If you understand the entire chessboard, then you can play the game most effective.
Financial success today, it's more about based on really having the long-term vision